This is the Property Development Book Club podcast. Please be advised that the views expressed are of the individuals and do not represent their employers and should not be taken as advice. Please do your own research and seek advice from an appointed professional.
Welcome to the Property Development Book Club. I will be your host, Kazeem Afolabi. I'm an Associate Director at BBS Capital working in debt financing. Today we'll be talking about, with my esteemed colleagues, the state of the property market. There's never been a more pertinent time to have this discussion, given where we are in this point in the world and where we are in this point in the market. And so I will let my esteemed colleagues introduce themselves one by one, and then we can kick this off. Why don't we start with Hattie?
Thanks, Kazeem. I'm Hattie Arnott. I'm a development surveyor by background, and I've been working in prop tech for the past 18 months.
Cool. I'm Dawson. I work at Octopus Real Estate, and I lend money to property developers.
I am Chianumba. I'm a chartered surveyor, valuation specialist, and I work for Neiman Webb Chartered Surveyors.
And I'm Hugh McEwen. I'm an architect, and I work with a 50-50 split of public clients and private clients.
So we have quite the room, and the state of the market is quite a broad topic. So there are going to be a few things. I mean, pertinent to this is obviously the budget that was announced by the Chancellor a couple of days ago, and the impact that's had on the property industry has been incredible. I also touch on how architecture and how sustainability is key, and how we as a property industry can help with the future. So why don't we start with probably the biggest conversation right now, given it's the state of the market. Why don't we just start with the impact that each of you, both from your professional but also your personal life, how the budget and how the environment has affected you. Again, why don't we start with Hattie?
I think the biggest thing, obviously, we've seen in this last week, literally just last week, has been panic. And whether or not I can actually do this, I think what I'm trying to remember is that panic is not very helpful. And so, we've been through recessions before, with much hardship, but we do come out the other side. And I think, as long as we take the approach of being sensible, reining our spending, reining our heating usage and the such like, then there will be some really exciting opportunities that come out of it. But if we just panic and reactive and start, selling stocks and, all of this, that's not going to be helpful.
I think Hattie's brought up a very interesting point that probably I want to come back to later, which is around being proactive rather than reactive. And particularly when it comes to the cost of living crisis and energy efficiency of buildings. If I talk about, say, the cost of occupation of buildings, because that covers cost of living, but also covers cost to businesses of heating and lighting and using their buildings. So I think what we'd all hope to see coming out of this is, with some government backing, big programs of insulation, swapping out boilers for heat pumps, putting solar panels on roofs, and really, if we can reduce our energy usage as a country, we all save money individually, but also, the more expensive peaker assets for producing electricity don't have to be run as much, so the cost of electricity itself will also fall. So that's something I want to sort of come back to this later in the podcast, but that's something I think we'd really hope that we'll see as a response to to the cost of living crisis. But yeah, if markets lose confidence, if sentiment rapidly changes, if businesses lose confidence and lose the capital to invest, you might not see that positive proactive response, and you might just see a very reactive, destructive response. But I very much hope we don't see that.
Yeah, I think it's I think when this podcast comes out, we'll be in a very different situation. And yeah, I hope it's a positive one. And I also hope it's one where, kind of bigger topics haven't been eclipsed by those kind of immediate financial concerns and kind of wider concerns around sustainability and around actually delivering those goals that have been set for longer periods are still being achieved and still being worked towards. And I think, you know, thinking back to the kind of credit crunch, you know, the response to that ended up being kind of a decade or so of austerity in the UK. And I really hope that we don't make that same mistake again, and we actually see big government and we see ideas around actually how things can be done differently, and that there can be a longer term view taken on finances and society, that hopefully kind of builds and actually achieves some of these goals that we set ourselves, and we don't lose sight of that.
We'll go back to energy as well. I think everyone's touched on energy cost. I think EPCs came in when they were mandatory in 2018. There's been the Green Deal or whatever. There's various things, various quangos thrown out at every single point by the government. But for people to actually take that up, it has to be reflective. There has to be a payback period. It has to be reflective on the value. So having an EPC rating of A, does it actually translate into value, making your home valuable? It doesn't. Until we take that into stock as well as a society, then people will buy into that. That's one area. There have been things like grey water recycling, sedum roofs, all those things, they've all been there for years. But the main point is, until people can see the benefit of them financially to them from a value perspective, they won't generally take up those things. But it's high time we start looking at that and finding a way to actually recognise the benefits of all these little initiatives. But also, if someone's going to pay $10,000 for a sedum roof, they have to translate to some form of value in their property, as opposed to the lender saying, we don't know what this is.
I suppose that's quite an interesting point, going back to what George was saying about the cost of living, is that if maybe now people are much more attuned to their energy uses than they would have been even a year ago. So actually we may find that organically people do start caring about an EPC who didn't 6 months ago.
Very true. I've never seen a situation where not having an EPC has stopped a transaction. Yeah. Just saying, when your reports, you usually just say, oh, bank to confirm, and that would be it.
It is an interesting point, though, because when you think about what drives innovation is typically necessity. And so most people in this room have had a call by your energy provider in the last week maybe saying that the cap is leaving or is going, and now we're going to have to figure out the higher payments, right? And so if you're buying a new house, or you're moving, or you're moving home, surely you will then start looking at, okay, well, I may want to move to a more energy efficient building, because if not, the cost to me on a daily basis will be more over the long term. So maybe actually, you know, this, in a lot of cases, you know, famous last words, but COVID potentially brought about, I wouldn't say some benefit, but maybe the way that we live our lives and the way we care about our loved ones maybe changed. Whether or not that has actually been the case, sort of 2 years on, that's yet to be seen. But in some cases, in real sort of, in hard times, people do find a way to find and bring up things that actually are positive and that may be able to have a lasting effect.
Yeah. So with property prices, what we've been seeing is there's no green premium.
Right.
Or so I mean, maybe the office market is different with BREEAM Excellent and so on. Some tenants do value that, but certainly for owner occupiers, I mean, well, particularly landlords, but for owner occupiers, there's no real green premium. People aren't paying a lot more for for solar panels and well insulated homes and so on. There is a little bit of research that suggests there is a bit of a green premium, but it's hard to spot. What we are seeing though is a brown discount. So if you've got a property that's EPCF, people don't want to buy it. That will get marked down below the rest of the market. So we're going to do a little plug here. We at Octopus, we've got a Greener Homes product in conjunction with Homes England. So it's a government Housing Funding Agency, yeah. And so what that does is it offers a real discount on developers' interest rates if they build green. So if they, maybe I won't talk about rates, but because rates could change very rapidly. On 29th of September here, 7 p.m. But who knows what they'll be by the time this podcast is released. But what we would do is we'd say we'll take 2% off the interest rate if you build to an EPCA, which is helping developers offset those costs. And we're finding there's a bit of an education piece that we're trying to lift developers up and help them build better stock. But more so what we're finding is the developers who are building EPCA anyway, they're saying, well, this is great. This is just free money for us.
Are we talking, these developers on the commercial or residential side? That's one thing we need to factor in. In the residential market, will the market pay a premium for an A? We've got to ask ourselves that question. There we go. Yeah.
I think my experience in the office world is that, again, it's not so much the necessary premium, but the big blue chip companies who are now so self-conscious about their image, who are the ones who will be taking 10-year highly valuable leases, they'll only be looking at the BREEAM Excellent and things like that. So I do think in offices it probably applies.
We fall back to the same situation again. The market, transactional office market, is virtually on its knees. So again, with many people working from home now and hybrid working, are people really going to pay £120 per square foot just because they want to laud and tell the whole world they've got green credentials?
Well, I think the evidence so far is that the ones who can do, and this is in London, because there's so few properly green buildings that they can then, exactly. But then it becomes really interesting. What do you do with all the office stuff?
Yeah. So I think we have quite an interesting, because we've actually touched on a lot of the topics that we wanted to touch on in blocks, and which is fantastic. And I guess where I'm going to move this to a little bit is valuation, right? Because this is a key aspect, because on one hand, we're talking about encouraging developers to build the right stock, right? And on the other hand, we're saying, well, you can build the right stock. Here's the value. However, the person who's buying it, are they attributing that value to the property? And so as a valuer, you're stuck in between. But this question is for you, Obi. So like, how do you, as a valuer, how do you think about, even in this inflationary environment, both on raw materials for developers, how do you think about values in 2, 3, 4 years when you're valuing stock today?
Well, you can't. You have to value as at today's state. You can't. You can have a retrospective value, but you can't project values. You're valuing as at that date of valuation. I think everyone has to buy into it. There's no need. The lenders need to buy into it. The end users need to buy into it. The developers clearly, as George just mentioned, are buying into it, but everyone has to buy into it, and the whole market, the whole sphere of the market needs to agree that there is a premium to be had. If not, there isn't a point doing it. If you're building to a green standard, it pushes up your build cost. So it does eat into your margins if the market won't pay that premium for it. There has to be a little bit of an education to people to say, here's the hardcore evidence. We've done the numbers, it works over the long term.
But who are you talking about? Are you talking about the buyer?
We're talking about there are various bodies out there. There are various energy companies out there. Let's get a general consensus where someone puts money to it. Let's look at the solar panels. Let's look at the grey water recycling. Let's look at a BREEAM building versus brown building. Let's look at what the occupational costs are. Let's look at the cost-benefit analysis in real hard facts. And when you put it in front of people, oh, crikey, I could be saving this amount.
So can I jump in here? So obviously Octopus Group, most people will be aware of because of Octopus Energy, which is a sister company to Octopus Real Estate where I work. Octopus Energy I think it's due to launch next week. They're trialling what they're calling zero bills homes. So they're, at the moment, they've got Ilka Homes on board. They're trying to get more developers on board. And basically the idea is that there's a standard that they've worked out that if you put a load of solar panels on the roof, you put a battery in, you have, everything's electrified, so no gas connection, you've got a heat pump for heating, you've got a induction hob, all of that. What they think you can do is in the summer, all of the excess energy from the solar panels goes back to Octopus Energy. You don't see the benefit of it. But then in the winter, when there's not much solar and you're running the heat pump all the time to heat the house, you then get energy from Octopus Energy for free. So it's a bit of give and take. Yeah, it's an interesting concept. I know.
It's a great company.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
But yeah, so the idea, and as I understand it, there is a high street bank that has said they'll then take into account in their affordability checks the fact that that property won't have an energy bill, which at the moment is £2,500
minimum
saving. Yeah, £2,500 saving. So they. It's a concept.
It's changing and developing so quickly that for the valuers, you have to just keep on top of it and to be observing it.
We're stickler for keeping on top of things.
Yeah.
And as an architect, how do you think about this? Because on one end, you want to create spaces that people want to be in, that are efficient and that are beautiful and that work. However, our good friend over here may actually argue, well, no one wants to pay that amount for it. Yeah. And our lender is like, well, this lender is doing well, but others may say you're not getting, the right amount of debt.
And I think that's where kind of different clients have different views as well, and I think this is where kind of alternative value systems kind of comes in, and that's something that I'd sort of like to talk a bit more about. But if you were to go to a local authority client who has stuck their neck out and they're targeting net zero carbon, they have a political imperative to deliver houses that are net zero. Yeah. So there is no, they can be as expensive as they are, they can make as little money, theoretically, because they have an absolute imperative that they have to deliver a legally binding performance target by a certain date. And so there's that is a completely different value system to a monetary one. It's completely political. It's totally about how do we achieve that goal that we've set ourselves. And yes, you can then reframe it, and you can frame it for people in terms of saving money on bills, and but I think actually it's much more about what do we need to do as society, and that is very important, but it sort of doesn't sit well within
private world.
Yeah, within financial value systems.
And how is it, and I don't know what you guys think about this, but I think you're onto something here, right? Because if you can marry your financial values with the social value, but also the community value, yeah. And you can go to an investor and say, hey, you might be making 10% money or 10% IRR on this. However, your 10% comes with X, Y, Z, the social value, which potentially can be quantified.
Yeah, it can, and I think that's a really. I think it's really interesting that putting social value into pounds and pence is kind of able to explain itself. But I think also we kind of need to step away from that. Financial being the purely the only way that you can value something. Right. And that actually, couldn't it be that we value, money in terms of social value? What's the social value that money could deliver? So, well, I think, we are a long way off that. But, I think it's the way. I think it's just more about, there are other ways that we can look at value. If you're tendering something, and there are a couple of local authorities have got really innovative community wealth building policies, which are literally about putting money back into the pocket of local people, and those then give alternative ways of valuing tenders that are non-financial. And I think it's so interesting that those things are starting to come around.
Completely agree. I'm a stickler for supporting small businesses, but businesses within your community. driving down here, tons of high rises, loads of housing. And I think the emphasis on development has now become housing because it produces the optimum value. Can't we have a development which incorporates a bit of housing, a bit of healthcare, some amenity space? You're losing quite a fair bit of amenity by clouding the whole landscape with just housing. But again, when we look at within the whole regeneration of this area, can we actually quantify how many local firms took part in the development or made money from that development? There'll be local firms around here who are groundworks, electrical guys, party wall, but how many of them? I think the big behemoths just loved going for the big contractors, and some of those contractors are not locally based, so there's nothing. People, big estate regeneration schemes, the reason most of them fail is because the local clientele, the stakeholders there are not really considered. I'm not going to mention there are a lot of North London schemes happening, but I can tell you there are not a lot of local firms who are part of that process. Those local firms work locally, they employ local, they pay business rates locally. So again, that value system, we need to actually pay some attention to that. A lot of local politicians will take the pictures, oh, we've built 1,000 new units, but who is that impacted locally? Hi, my name's Chianumba. I'm a valuer, chartered surveyor. You've been watching the Property Development Book Club podcast, season 2. Like, share and subscribe.
My name is Dawson. I work in real estate development finance at Octopus Real Estate. You've been watching the Property Development Book Club podcast. Like, share and subscribe.
Hi, I'm Hattie and this is the Property Development Book Club podcast, season 2, sponsored by Mood and Space. Like, share, subscribe.
You've been listening to season 2 of the Property Development Book Club podcast, sponsored by Mood and Space.
Hi there, I'm Hugh McEwen. I'm a partner at Office S&M Architects, and thanks very much for listening to season 2 of the Property Development Book Club podcast, sponsored by Mood and Space. Like, share and subscribe.
That's a very good point. I'm going to switch tact a little bit, and we're going to talk about, for 5 minutes, a topic that is very close to my heart: debt. And it either people get either conscious, nervous, or worried about this. So particularly about the debt markets, given how volatile it's been over the last specifically week. George, I just wanted to start with you as a lender. How you just give a couple of words around how you see the debt markets personally, but also how you as a lender think that we can sort of get over the hump of where the market is currently?
Tough brief. So with debt, I think a large part of it is how the lender is funded themselves. So are they funded from the markets? So they're taking debt from other banks to fund themselves, or are they do they have a big pot of cash that they're sat on that's come from other funds that they can lend out, or are they a bank with retail deposits? And obviously, then if they're banks, there's a lot of different regulation they've got to follow as well. So yeah, if you're sat there with a large pot of cash that you can call upon, you have returns you have to make for investors and a target return, but you're not borrowing at SONIA or anything, the interbank rate, then it's just a case of sitting here watching the market. What's everyone else doing? Where's sentiment? Where do we think the housing market's going to go? And you can play for time a bit and tweak your rates as needed. And if you want to turn off the taps, you can turn off the taps, or you can kind of keep tentatively going and just bring your gearing down a bit and hope that things stabilise. If though you're funded by debt from other banks and you're above SONIA, then SONIA's gone up probably 1% in a week. So your cost of debt has gone up 1% a week. So what you're passing on to your clients has probably gone up by a bit more than 1% in a week. So then it's then it's a very different equation, and yeah, I think it's going to be a tough time for lenders. I mean, one thing with development lending is you're building, you're closing a deal now that's going to take at least a year to build out. A lot of schemes 2-3 years. Flatted schemes would be 2 or 3 years. So you got to make an assessment of, yeah, sure, there might be a market correction in the next 12 months, but by the time they're selling these flats in 2 years, are things going to have recovered a bit? I mean, no one knows the answer to that, so everyone will come up with a different answer to it. But I think ultimately there'll always be good schemes that you can back, but the market has sentiment as well, and if everyone does get a bit scared, so as a lender you can't really buy the dip, so we'll see.
Yeah, and I think so. As an advisor, I think we at BBS Capital, I said quite a unique space because we're helping and arranging financing for our clients who want to take debt out. And in simple terms, if you were looking to buy a house and you were a mortgage broker, for example, you go to your mortgage broker and your broker tells you what the rates are available for you to borrow to buy your house. I wouldn't say that that's what I do, but it's in a nutshell similar, but for large institutions and for clients with projects that are a little bit larger. And so depending on whether it's an investment deal, depending on whether it's a development deal, obviously this last week has been very difficult because people with huge amounts of money are waiting and looking to see whether, because not just on the debt side, but on the equity side as well. If you're buying a house and the prices of rates have gone up, it will have an impact on the value of the property. And so lots of people with what we say, huge sums of money are waiting to see whether they can get deals that'll be cheaper in a month, 2 months, 3 months, based on the environment that we're in at the moment. So as much as there is doom and gloom, there's also opportunity, I guess is kind of where we're going with this. And that's a very nice segue of opportunity into how, from an opportunity for sustainability and the state of the market in sustainability for whether it's developments, whether it's architecture, property technology, and lending. Can you guys just give a little bit of your thoughts around how you see the state of the market when it comes to sustainability in the UK and what we can do in the next sort of few years to make this place a better place for our kids?
Oh. Sorry, I'm just following your thoughts there. Can I quickly just pick up something on the prop tech, or yeah. Do we need to move on to the sustainability? I think one thing that's really exciting about this time is that because the markets have been quite steady, let's say, over the last realistically since Brexit, things have been kind of not great but fine, and then now we're entering quite a different time. And I believe that's one of the reasons why tech adoption and also probably sustainability adoption has been relatively slow, because people have been doing fine. So why do we need to change things? Why do we need to spend money on new systems which we don't when we're fine? And I'm actually quite excited that this will be the point where people can't just keep going as they were before. And so I think I think there'll be both a consumer behaviour change, let's say from the simple example, I'm guessing everyone here has used less heating over the last month than they would have done September last year. Which also shows that we probably should have been doing that anyway, and we just didn't need to. So I think there'll be that natural consumer just awareness change, which will help on the sustainability side. And then I think on the technology side, I think people will be willing to try more things, because we'll be at a point where it's right, well, let's say we can't sell a house in a traditional way. Let's look at one of these house buying platforms that will give me a fixed price and I can sell my house tomorrow. And those haven't really taken off recently, in the last 5 years, but there are platforms like that might suddenly become really valuable tools in our society.
Turning to you, Obi.
Sustainability. Not quite sure where to actually land on.
As a valuer,
Or do
I
you want
guess.
me to- I can
Yeah,
jump in, or-
No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
I
I'll
think
about it.
to come back to your question, I think that shift, I would hope it will be a return or a view about long-termism and really thinking about things over a much greater period of time, because I think that I think as Hattie was touching on there, this kind of it's okay, we can just kind of keep going and thinking about this sort of short term, I think just isn't going to really cut it anymore. And as George was saying about kind of riding out the dip or kind of longer term views on debt, I think that has for me kind of been a view that's been building around just thinking about a significantly longer period than we have previously, and it's kind of structuring our lives and structuring society kind of around that, and then obviously the built environment that kind of follows that. And I think in some way, if we look back at things like the oil crisis in the 70s, that led to a radical rethinking of how kind of society could work, was all of these incredible movements around sort of how we could literally rebuild the world based on that, not needing supplies and not needing to be reliant on fossil fuels. And it kind of feels as though potentially that could be an outcome, that there could be a kind of societal change, and you've seen that in younger generations of people kind of coming through and really championing that. And so I kind of in some way hope that it can lead to a sort of different feel about time and a different view on time, I think.
Just a quick point there. Sustainability, we're talking about it. We've talked about the various options, initiatives. What about the skill sets? The right skills to actually deliver these things. One of my favourite places to go is Norway and the Scandinavian countries. Those people are absolutely brilliant at construction, retrofitting, 1960s blocks. Their buildings are energy efficient. They've got everything in there. We need the right skills. Your typical heating engineer only knows how to probably install a district heating system, a combi boiler, system boiler. We're talking about heat pumps. We need the right skill set to do that. We need the right skills. There needs to be some form of upskilling of the people who are actually going to take this whole sustainability initiative forward for the long term. And you have to then get those guys, the tradesmen, to buy into the whole process, to move away from your traditional combi district heating installation and bring in I don't know how you do it, whether it's a new degree course or technical training, but we need those skill sets.
Yeah, it's really interesting what you both just said, because of course Sweden and the Scandinavian countries after the oil crisis moved to heat pumps. So their heat pump penetration is like 70-80% of the market or something crazy. So they did that back in the 70s and 80s after the oil crisis. So yeah, this could be Western Europe, UK's time to do the same.
Desperation breeds innovation. Back to that. So one of the phenomenal things about the Property Development Book Club is just the array of perspective and professionals in the property industry that are just sat amongst us. And we've touched on a lot of different topics, but they've all been in and around property, just from very different perspectives. And I guess coming to almost like a conclusion of the state of the market, both from a debt and equity market, both from property, PropTech, sustainability, finance, valuation, to almost wrap it all up. And I would like for you guys, each of you guys, to sort of give almost like your final word, but include in that where you see the future. So your final word, but plus what is the advice you're giving to people that might be listening to this? You probably will be wrong, but and by the time this comes out, it will probably be retrospective looking, but I think it'll be interesting to hear anyway. So So when we start with you, Hugh.
Yeah, I think really to echo Obi's point, I think it's like the next generation. It's like how can kind of the youth of today be put in the position of having the skills that empower them to kind of make those moves in the future, and how can then that transition into something that's a much longer term view. And I think, you know, yeah, that's got to be all the generations kind of ahead of them. They've got to be their responsibility to hand that over. And I think only then can you then start to take those longer term views without actually ride out, you know, any of the problems that we're looking and challenging, you know, being challenged by at the moment.
And how do you see the state of the market?
Ask me when this comes out.
Again, championing Hugh's point about value system, I think in the last few years, our perspective on value has just been monetary. We need to move away from that. Society needs to be more equitable for everyone, both in the built environment and everything else. We really do need to focus on that as well. One of the biggest factors, I have quite elderly parents, so I'm acutely aware that sometimes when we talk about built development or built environment, we don't really look at the elderly as well. We're losing a lot of bungalows. There's no preeminent developer doing elderly care, elderly property, apart from, is that McCarthy, Stone or someone? We really do need to start looking at developing communities where we're not just having penthouses, high rises. Let's have a mix of both the elderly there, the middle age. Let's have a mixed community, not just shipping off our elderly to some retirement flats in the middle of nowhere. We've got an aging generation. So we need to actually start building for these people. Fortunately, my parents have a place which has a through-the-ceiling lift that gets them up, as opposed to a stair lift. Stair lifts are, 20, 30 years old, they're outdated. Let's like looking at developments and tenures that includes the elderly as well.
I mean, look, it's going to be a tough time in the immediate future, the short term. But I think if you want to solve the cost of living crisis, if you want better energy security as a nation, if you want to, get to net zero and reduce carbon emissions, then energy efficiency, electrification, your own homegrown renewables in terms of solar panels or offshore wind farms or whatever, onshore wind farms, that is the solution. It solves all of those problems are solved by that drive. So yeah, in the built environment, we need to be driving that much more.
I think one thing that I've always been very passionate about in our industry is the amount of empty space that we see, even just walking down today from the tube and seeing so many empty flats, empty retail units. And again, I think it's because people have been complacent and haven't had, the increasing, finance has been so cheap that it hasn't mattered really if something's sat empty. And so my prediction or hope for the next year is that more people end up selling empty flats. We get places back into occupation, sites that have just been sat there because the developer didn't need to do anything with it can finally get sold, and we can get some real movement and some better use of all the existing space that we do actually have available.
Well said. And I think just as a wrap up from my perspective, the really interesting thing, I guess, especially in times of pain, and I think we've all touched on it today, is that it doesn't last forever. History has told us this numerous times, and the state of the market today, and we've laughed and joked about this, but it's absolutely apt. By the time this podcast comes out, it might look a very, very different place. And so keeping calm and carrying on, there will be pain. I think that's kind of the general consensus of everyone. But through that pain, there's innovation, and there's light ahead of that tunnel, and there are things that we can do and that we all will be doing to help us alleviate some of those pains, whether that's through all the things that you guys have talked about, whether that's through the debt or equity markets that are currently there. But I think to conclude, the state of the market is interesting. However, in future, it will get better.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
This is the Property Development Book Club podcast. Please be advised that the views expressed are of the individuals and do not represent their employers and should not be taken as advice. Please do your own research and seek advice from an appointed professional.